Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to our second edition of Breaking News for this Friday. It is the 21st day of November, 2025, and all of our stories will concentrate on the peace deal. No, not the one between Israel and Hamas that the United States has brokered, but rather the one between Russia and Ukraine that the President of the United States has insisted that Ukraine accept immediately. This is a huge story that's coming across the wire, so we are dedicating the entire program to this, and we will explain what it means with respect to last day's Bible prophecy. Here are the four headlines that we will concentrate on. First, from the Washington Post, U.S. pushing Ukraine to sign peace deal by Thanksgiving or lose support. That's the huge headline here. And then Zelensky says Ukraine is facing impossible choice on the peace deal. This is a story from Newsmax. Former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich slams U.S. peace plan betrayal. Ukraine must reject it. This is from Newsmax also. And then from Zero Hedge, we have some of the hawkish countries of the EU, European Union, that are weighing in. Like I said, we'll explain what this scenario has to do with last day's Bible prophecy because it does have a number of ramifications. And actually, this story has global ramifications. So let's get right to it. Okay, headline one. U.S. pushing Ukraine to sign peace deal by Thanksgiving or lose support from the Washington Post. The U.S. is now sending signals that everything could be off the table if Kyiv does not quickly sign a proposal, which was drawn up by whom? Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. This is from Kyiv, the headline. The White House is pressuring Ukraine to sign onto its new peace proposal by Thanksgiving or lose U.S. support to the country, according to two officials familiar with the talks, speaking on the condition of anonymity to describe sensitive diplomatic discussions. U.S. Army Secretary Daniel Driscoll presented Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Thursday with a version of the 28-point plan President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff recently drafted with Russian envoy Kirill Dmitriev. That plan, which has been leaked in the press and confirmed by several individuals, several officials, included several red lines for Ukraine, including a massive reduction of its army size and ceding territory to Russia that it has not yet conquered militarily. All right. Although Trump has drawn down direct aid to Ukraine, the U.S. has brokered deals for Ukraine to receive U.S. weapons through European partners and continues to share intelligence that is crucial to Ukraine's survival on the battlefield. The U.S., however, is now sending signals that everything could be off the table if Kiev does not quickly sign a proposal, the officials said, even as Driscoll took a lighter tone in Thursday's meeting. Zelensky requested changes to the document on Thursday, and Driscoll's team agreed some changes could be made. One of the officials said, although Kiev remains unclear on which points will be adjustable. The document would initially be signed by Zelensky and Trump before being presented to the Russians. The U.S. appears to have divided the teams between Witkoff and Driscoll to play good cop and bad cop. One presses, the other tries to say, let's work together to change the plan, one of the officials said. Following the Thursday meeting in Kiev, U.S. officials, including Julie Davis, the charge d'affaires at the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine, said the timeline for signing is quote unquote aggressive. I'll say so. Army spokesman Colonel Dave Butler declined to discuss details of negotiations. Now, the plan contains elements long pushed for by Moscow, including a full withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from the heavily fortified Donetsk region in the east of Ukraine, granting Russia full control of territory it has not been able to conquer in nearly 4 years of war. Russia would receive also de facto recognition of its control of Crimea, Luhansk, and Donetsk, as well as the area of Kherson and Zaporizhzhia, whatever that is, it has illegally seized, with the conflict in these regions frozen on the current front line. Ukraine would be forced to enshrine in its constitution that it will not seek to join NATO's Western alliance while agreeing to significantly reduce the size of its armed forces from 800,000 to 850,000 military personnel to 600,000. As we have mentioned previously, these seem like Russians' talking points. So the question is, why in the world would the U.S. try to force Ukraine to sign something like this? And why in the world is Steve Witkoff drawing up the agreement? All right, headline number two, this is from Newsmax. Zelensky, Ukraine facing impossible choice on peace deal. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky indicated Friday that his country is facing an almost impossible choice: lose its dignity by accepting a 28-point peace plan brokered by the Trump administration, or risk losing a valuable ally in the United States. Ukraine may soon face an extremely difficult choice: either the loss of dignity or the risk of losing a key partner, Zelensky said on Telegram, according to the Kyiv Independent. Either 28 complicated points or the hardest winter yet, and the risks that follow. Zelensky emphasized that Ukraine's position would be based on national priorities and ongoing dialogue with key allies. Ukraine's national interests must be taken into account, he said. We will pursue a calm dialogue with America and all of its partners. There will be a constructive search for solutions with our main partner. He urged Ukrainians to stop the quarrels, stop the political games, in a possible reference to a major corruption scandal that has brought fierce criticism of his government, and said peace talks next week will be very difficult, quote unquote. Now, again, the draft peace plan would require Ukraine to cede territory to Russia, as we mentioned, something Zelensky has repeatedly ruled out, reduce the size of its armed forces, halt its long sought bid for NATO membership also. President Donald Trump said Friday he wants an answer from Zelensky by Thursday. That would be Thanksgiving Day, though he noted an extension is possible according to multiple media outlets. Zelensky's office confirmed the receipt of the plan, the Independent reported, adding that the document was presented by the U.S. as a potential way to reinvigorate stalled diplomatic efforts. Zelensky is expected to outline diplomatic options and key conditions for peace in his upcoming talks with Trump. Zelensky also spoke by telephone with Vice President J.D. Vance, according to multiple media outlets. Following the hour-long call, Zelensky said the sides had managed to cover a lot of the details of the American side proposals for ending the war, and were working to make the path forward dignified and truly effective for achieving a lasting peace. Russian President Vladimir Putin said the plan could form the basis of a final peace settlement, according to the Independent, and claimed a version of it was discussed during his meeting with Trump in Alaska in August. Again, we ask, why should Ukraine capitulate? That's the big question. All right. Headline number 3, we're going to hear from former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, and he is not impressed with this plan. Newt Gingrich slams U.S. peace plan as a betrayal. Ukraine must reject it. Former House Speaker Newt Gingrich on Thursday issued a blistering indictment on X, formerly Twitter, of a proposed U.S. peace plan between Ukraine and President Vladimir Putin's Russia. Gingrich wrote, any peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia which weakens Ukraine's ability to defend itself is in fact a surrender agreement which guarantees that in the next few years, Putin will overrun all of Ukraine. He added Ukrainian courage and patriotism should not be betrayed by America growing tired of stopping evil. In other words, Americans are getting tired of all this evil in Ukraine, of supporting it. So let's just call it a day and give it to Russia. A Putin victory, Gingrich says, will be a stepping stone to a much, much more dangerous world. Gingrich's virulent words undermine apparent U.S. plans to force Ukraine to quickly accept its terms that would require Kyiv to accept major concessions. We do mean major concessions in exchange for American-led security guarantees that remain completely undefined. Gingrich offered several reasons for his warning that Ukraine should refuse any deal that weakens its defense posture. First of all, loss of deterrence and defense capabilities. He argues that if Ukraine agrees to limits, that is, on its military size, its ability to strike into Russian territory, or to retain certain weapon systems, it would undermine the very engine of its survival. In his view, a weakened Ukraine invites renewed aggression from Russia and eventually the loss of the country. The second point, Gingrich mentions, symbolic betrayal of the Ukrainian sacrifice. Gingrich emphasized that Ukrainians have fought and died and rebuilt under fire for their freedom, and that for the U.S. or the West to pressure Kyiv into an unfavorable deal is not just a strategic error, but a moral betrayal of Ukrainian courage. Number 3, global strategic implications. Gingrich contends that allowing Putin to prevail in Ukraine would not stop at that conflict. And that's one of the real worries. Where's Putin going to go to next? A Russian victory, in Gingrich's view, would embolden Moscow, weaken the Western alliance, and signal to rivals that aggression pays, potentially destabilizing Europe and beyond. Of course, beyond we know is going to eventually be the Middle East and Israel someday. And then timing and American fatigue. Gingrich implicitly links his concerns to what he perceives as a U.S. war fatigue or domestic pressure to disengage. If the U.S. allows Ukraine to settle for a deal perceived as surrender, the lesson will be that the West backs away when the stakes get heavy. While Gingrich's criticism is pointed, he is not alone in sounding alarms about the proposed peace architecture. The Institute for the Study of War, the ISW, it's a U.S.-based research group tracking the Ukraine war, warned that the U.S. peace plan is tantamount to full capitulation of Ukraine to Russia. In one note, the ISW stated an agreement based on those protocols would be a capitulation document. Ukraine is unlikely to accept any peace agreement based on the Istanbul negotiations precisely because that would amount to full surrender to Russian long-term war goals. ISW also noted that Russian demands such as deep cuts in Ukrainian forces, removal of long-range weapons, and tightly constrained defense postures give Moscow a disproportionate advantage over Ukraine. The think tank also warned that if Ukraine agreed to such an agreement, Russia would be emboldened to attack Ukraine again and other targets across Europe. In other words, it's just a stepping stone to the next attack. All right. So finally, we go to Zero Hedge, and they have an article about this. And what they add to the mixture here is the European response. Here's the article. Kyiv was under greater pressure from Washington than during any previous peace discussions, and that the U.S. wanted Ukraine to sign a framework of the deal by next Thursday, the report said. Trump has also again admitted that Ukraine forces are fast losing ground on the battlefield. Here it comes. In the meantime, Ukraine is reportedly in discussions with its more hawkish backers in Europe, France, Germany, and the UK, on a counter proposal which would supplant the U.S. peace plan. Russia said it's yet to receive anything official from the United States regarding the new draft Trump-backed plan for ending the war in Ukraine, already several media headlines say Ukraine and European leaders are signaling their rejection of it as it presents too much of a compromise. All right, and this could tear apart NATO too, because some countries may go for it, some may not. Now, here's the bottom line. This enterprise, this entire enterprise, whatever takes place, will have global ramifications. For our purposes, as we look at events, how it fits with last days Bible prophecy, there's a couple of things we need to take note of. First, it proves how the Bible characterizes Russia at the time of the end. Namely, there'll be a powerful country that will eventually be able to put together a coalition of nations together to invade Israel. The motivation behind the attack is that Russia, with its surrogates attacking, which include Iran, Turkey, etc., will have something these countries want as well as something they need from Israel. They will invade to take something that doesn't belong to them. And again, Russia has to be in a powerful position. We've talked about this before, to encourage Turkey, Iran, and other countries to be part of this invading force. Now, second, to get to this point, the war with Ukraine must end so Russia can have its adventurism elsewhere. In other words, right now it couldn't do something like this because all its military assets are tied up fighting Ukraine. All right. For a biblical explanation of the players who will be involved, those who sit on the sidelines and complain, as well as those who will be conspicuous by their absence, please see our book 25 Signs. We're near the end. Signs specifically 9 through 11 from our website, Educating Our World. Also, our book, The Ezekiel 38-39 Invasion, which talks about in great detail what's going to take place. These books are free download from our website, Educating Our World, under the heading of Bible Prophecy. Just two of the 65 books that we have available for free download. Now, as far as what happens in the short term, stay tuned. We have no idea. But whatever happens, whatever takes place, it will be huge, and we'll keep you posted. I'm Don Stewart. Thanks again for watching. Until next time, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless you.